and welcome to this episode of Focus On. Unlocking Trade for Sustainable Growth in the Region in the East Africa Business Summit serves as a pivotal gathering for stakeholders, policymakers, and the private sector to foster discussions and collaborations to deepen trade in the region. Joining me for more is Manzi Regasira, CEO of Stanbic Bank, Tanzania.
I think some of the key takeaways that I took from this summit is there's a lot of mutual aspiration for the region. There is a common desire for greater collaboration, cooperation, and a vision where you have a more integrated region. And that came from the private sector participants as well as the public sector participants. And that's key because that lays the foundation for the discussions that we want to have. So with that common sort of view, common understanding, how do we now actually take that vision, actually action it? And this is what this whole series of summits is about, right? We have a common desire to integrate the region. How do we now actually break it down to actionable actions to make it viable and feasible? So I'm excited. We covered a lot of ground, but there's still a lot more work that needs to be done.
So what can we say where is the state of regional integration and also with global trade and networks when it comes to unlocking trade in the region, particularly in Tanzania?
I think for Tanzania and its place within the region, trade is coming off a rather modest base, but the trend is a positive one. Increasing trade between Tanzania and Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda, but there's a lot more that can be done between the three big countries and the other countries which have more recently joined the East African Economic Community. I think there's some milestones that we're beginning to reach. We talked a little bit about the East Africa crude oil pipeline. That's a mega infrastructure project, big ticket item, but really speaks to the close collaboration that Uganda and Tanzania have, and it's a good example of what regional collaboration can lead to. So one of the things that came out of our discussion around the energy sector is that can we leverage that example and do more of such projects going forward? So when we talk about regional energy infrastructure, what does that mean for the economy? What does it mean for our nations? Is that if we work together, we can really harness capabilities. Tanzania is uniquely placed in that it's blessed with an abundance of resources, and those resources can really be leveraged and utilized by our fellow EAC members. So we've started that discussion. I hope these discussions are taking place in various government offices in the region, and we can see where it goes from here and in the years ahead.
Yes, indeed. And as much as there's a growing demand for the economy, let us look at the ESG integration here. What are some of the principles that you're putting in place?
I think what really came out is that ESG is something that should not be seen as a nice to have, but should be seen as something that's integral to how businesses do their daily work. And it's certainly something that we as Standard Bank as a group and Stanbic Tanzania specifically have begun to fully integrate into how we do our business. So when we do transactions, when we look at projects, we look to see how do they fit or what is their, we try to assess them through a lens of not just commercial, but also the impact on environment, social, and how these projects and clients assessed and how do they rank on a governance level. Because what we do as businesses has to be sustainable. It has to have a positive impact on the societies in which we operate in. And it was heartening to hear that, broadly speaking, there's a consensus on that. I think some of the technicalities on how it's actually implemented still needs to be worked out. There's a sense that some of these ESG principles tend to be impediments to finance and growth. I think we can take that as a challenge and not see them necessarily as an impediment, but something that we need to look at. Because at the end of the day, we need to think beyond the immediate short term. Sometimes as businesses, we might be tempted to look only at the short term, but the medium and long term consequences are never as far away as one thinks, and they might always come back to you. So long story short, ESG is something that's important, something that companies have taken to heart, and something that's very much aligned to what the policymakers want in terms of realizing sustainable growth going forward.
On environmental, social and governance principles, International Finance Corporation (IFC) has taken it a notch higher and also closely enhancing private sector collaboration to address growth challenges. Martin Valsin, country manager at IFC Tanzania, sheds light on this.
Development finance institution, we're very much focused on ESG risk management. So we have very high standards in terms of environmental and social risk management. So understanding the impact of the business on occupational health and safety, on the biodiversity, on the environment, waste emissions, and all of that, right? So in all of our projects really undertake a very robust ESG risk management process. So we try to identify the material issues and we work hand in hand with the clients to find mitigants and implement solutions. So that's on the risk management side. But we're also very much focused on the opportunity side. So how can we find projects that will reduce GHG emissions, for example, transitioning from coal-powered energy to renewable energy, or finding solutions where women will be having more access or easier access to finance. So these are, the angles that we look at. So there's a risk management angle, but also the opportunity side that is very much part of our DNA.
And when we talk policy here, and policymakers have a big role to play, as a private player, what are some of the policies that you feel should be eased to ensure that trade is deepened country to country and also regionally?
One of the things that really came out of the discussion is that non-tariff barriers remain one of the impediments to trade. So non-tariff barriers would be checks on borders. There might be, regulatory requirements which are not aligned between countries, things of that nature, which sort of impede or make it more difficult to do business. I think if our national governments are able to take a holistic approach and see, what is in the maximum interest of the majority of the people, we might get to a stage where we can start to challenge some of these non-tariff barriers and start reducing them. These are things that may not happen immediately. They're sensitive. Political leaders need to look at where are the people, where's the populace at the moment, what is the sentiment, are people willing to have free movement of capital, free movement of people. It's a journey. It's not something that's going to happen necessarily today or tomorrow per se, but it is necessary to have a more integrated region and a more integrated economic bloc. But we see that as being a journey with milestones, and we think that if we can keep having this conversation, keep driving these issues, we'll be able to make steady progress going forward.
IFC is focused on private sector development. So as a development finance institution, we invest in private companies in a variety of sectors, going from energy, financial institutions, manufacturing, agriculture. But when we look at our strategy, what we try to understand is where are the greatest development needs of the specific country. And when we do so, we work together as the World Bank Group with our colleagues from the World Bank who are very much focused on the public sector side of things. So we're trying to understand, for example, where are the greatest needs, what are the drivers for growth, what are the drivers to create employment, youth employment, for women inclusion. And then when we design a project or we have an investment in sight, we're not just a regular financial institution looking for a financial return, but also trying to understand the socio-economic impacts and benefits of that project. So, our strategy is very much trying to align with the priorities of the government, understanding the drivers for growth, understanding the gaps. And when we design a project or we have an investment that we consider, understanding how that project will contribute to bridging those gaps. And these can be inclusion of women, youth employment, reduction of GHG emissions, introduction of climate-smart agriculture solutions, for example.
Indeed, and in terms of addressing challenges when it comes to growth, what are we saying here and how have you been able to navigate that sphere?
There is a recognition that the public sector in itself cannot meet all the development challenges that are ahead in all of the countries in which we operate, right? So what is important is to make sure that the private sector can play its role in terms of developing, in terms of driving employment, in terms of driving innovation, in terms of driving climate change solutions, for example. So in Tanzania, we're very much, we're very, I would say bullish on Tanzania, in the sense that 2 years ago, we only had 2 people in the IFC working here in Dar es Salaam, and now we're more than 20. So to me, that shows how we see Tanzania as a very promising market in terms of private sector development. We've been engaging with a number of companies, industry associations, and also the government, and we're very excited about the prospects that Tanzania offer for us at IFC.
You're parting those when it comes to the public-private partnerships here in Tanzania. What is it like?
So public-private partnership is something that has been very much adopted and taken on board by the government of Tanzania. There's a realization that some of these big ticket items and projects that need to be developed in the years ahead to cater to the growing population, it's not feasible for the government necessarily to fund these projects all on their own. So you need to look at alternative ways of funding, and public-private partnerships is one avenue that's being explored. So we see that in the road sector. So roads are instrumental to transport. There's a very good example that's happened more recently in Kenya with the Nairobi Expressway. I think policymakers here have seen that and are looking to see whether something like that can be emulated here in Tanzania. So there's some exciting conversations happening around the expressways outside of Dar, connecting different parts of this commercial region. So in the years ahead, I think there'll be a lot of activity in that space, and we help the government develop the infrastructure that it needs.
And that is how we wrap up today's episode of Focus On. From me, Tabitha Muthoni, it's a bye for now.